Hi everyone! Today is our second story in our new domain about immigration. Today's story is called A Little Giant Comes to America. Well, let's think about what we learned so far in the previous lesson. You heard the Latin phrase E pluribus unum. E pluribus unum is a good motto for a nation made up of immigrants because it means out of many one. Remember, immigrants are people who leave their home country to live in a new country. They may leave their home country because of certain factors called push and pull factors. Some push factors that you heard about so far are fear and lack of freedom to practice one's religion, money problems, and maybe even problems in the government. But some pull factors that you heard about are freedom of religion and speech and better job opportunities. Take a look at this map that you see here on the screen. Do you see the continent of North America and the United States? Remember, people immigrate to countries like the United States from many different countries because of those push and pull factors discussed in the previous lesson. Over the next several days, you'll hear why different groups of people immigrated to the United States. Take a look at this map. It's the same one as before, but I've zoomed in just a little bit to show you the continent of Europe. Do you see the country of Germany? Germany is a country in the continent of Europe. From the country of Germany, a man named Charles Steinmetz, who you'll learn about today, crossed the Alps Mountains into the country of Switzerland. Then, from Switzerland, he made his way all the way across the Atlantic Ocean to the United States. Do you see the Statue of Liberty? She's in New York City. Today, you'll hear about New York Harbor. A harbor is a body of water next to land that's deep enough for ships to anchor and where they'll be protected from high winds and big waves. I want you to listen carefully to find out why Charles Steinmetz immigrated to the United States and how his presence helped the United States. But before we start reading, let's take a look at some of the words that we're going to hear in today's story. The first word that I want to talk about is the word opportunity. This is the only word that you'll put in your vocabulary books today. The word opportunity means a chance or a possibility. Another word you'll hear today is liberty. Liberty means freedom. The third word you'll hear today is interpreter. An interpreter is a person who turns speech from one language into another language. Look, there she is! With cries of excitement, the ship's passengers rushed to the railing. It was the summer of 1889 when this ship of European immigrants made its way into New York Harbor. In the distance stood the sight they had dreamed of seeing, the Statue of Liberty, a symbol of freedom and hope, welcoming them to their new home in the United States of America. There were many push and pull factors that led many people to come to America. Some wanted to own their own farms or businesses and knew that there was a greater chance of doing that in America than in their old countries. Others came from poor places where finding food or shelter had been a desperate daily struggle. They hoped that if they worked hard in this new place, they and their families could be sure of warm meals and a suitable place to take shelter and call home. Among the passengers was a man from Germany who, although an adult, stood only 4 feet tall, and whose body, instead of growing straight, seemed to bend to one side. His name was Charles Steinmetz, and he was a mathematician or an expert in mathematics, and an engineer, or a person trained to design and build machines, bridges, or buildings. He had left his home in Germany for 2 reasons. First, he had trouble finding work in his homeland because he looked different. Many people did not understand that a powerful mind and a kind heart lay inside Charles's body. Second, Charles had written an article that said his nation's government was to blame for many problems. In many countries, writing such an article could land a person in trouble. One day, a friend warned Charles, "My brother, who works for the government, says that the police are going to arrest you and put you in jail." To avoid being sent to jail, Charles fled over the Alps, a large mountain range in Europe, to Switzerland. There, a friend of his named Oscar gave him a place to stay. Over dinner one night, Oscar said, "I am moving to America, Charles. Come with me. There you can find work and be free to write or say what you think." "If only I could," Charles sighed. "I cannot afford to buy a ticket." Oscar smiled. "My uncle moved to America and made a fortune. He's paying for my ticket, and I wrote to him, and he's offered to pay for yours, too." Now, less than 2 months later, Charles and Oscar, along with many other European immigrants, were sailing to New York Harbor on the east coast of the United States. Charles was too short to see over the heads of the other passengers, but Oscar cleared a path for him through the crowd. A minute later, the two friends stood at the railing, staring up at the statue whose lamp lit the way toward the new homeland. Beyond the Statue of Liberty, on its island in New York Harbor, was another island called Ellis Island. There was enormous buildings and docks on this island, where ships could anchor and unload passengers. Charles thought, "That is Ellis Island. That is where the American government decides who gets to enter the country and who might be turned away. I know that only a few people are turned away, those who are dangerous, sick, or don't have the papers saying they can move to a new country. Will they let me in after my trouble back home? Will they look at the way my body bends to one side and say I'm too small or weak to be welcome to America?" Hours later, Charles stood in a huge room in a building called the Immigration Center. Long lines of immigrants waited to approach a row of desks. This is where government clerks would ask questions to determine whether the travelers would be allowed to enter the United States. In another part of the building, doctors waited to examine the immigrants. Most people were allowed in, but Charles worried. "What will I do if they turn me away? I cannot return home. If I do, I will be sent to jail." Finally, he reached the head of the line. A government clerk asked him a question, but Charles did not even understand English. The clerk called over an interpreter who knew many languages, including German. Using the interpreter to turn his English words into German, the clerk asked, "What is your name?" Charles said his name, and the clerk wrote it in a book. Then, without looking up, he asked, "Do you have a job waiting here for you?" "No," Charles answered. "Do you have any money to live on until you find a job?" "No," Charles admitted. Now the clerk looked up at Charles and shook his head. "So you have no money and no job, and you speak no English. I'm sorry, but we want people who can add something to our nation." Just then Charles's friend Oscar stepped forward. "If you turn this man away," he said, "you will be making the greatest mistake of your life. This is Charles Steinmetz, one of the greatest scientific and mathematical thinkers in the world. He may be only 4 feet tall, but he has many talents, and you want citizens who can improve this country. He can. I am so sure of it that I will pay all of his expenses until he has a job." 2 hours later, Oscar's uncle welcomed Oscar and Charles to his big house in New York City. Soon afterward, Charles Steinmetz began to learn English and went to work at a large company, using his powerful mind to invent useful new products. He helped improve the way electricity is carried through wires in order to bring electric power to buildings and houses. He helped to make electric streetlights possible and worked with the famous American inventor Thomas Edison. Charles wrote books that helped other scientists understand electricity. He made more than 200 scientific discoveries. These discoveries made Charles Steinmetz famous and earned him a great deal of money, but he never forgot how other people had helped him. While continuing his scientific work, Charles began teaching at a college near New York City. He refused to take any pay for his teaching, saying, "Teaching others how to create useful inventions is the best way to repay the United States for taking me in." His friend Oscar understood. He explained in later years, like so many others, Steinmetz came to America so he could help others with his talents and also have a good job and life for himself. That is why they call the United States the land of opportunity. Like many other immigrants, the move to America gave Charles a new chance to achieve something. Oscar continued, "I believe that each person brings something good to share. Putting all our talents together can make the United States and its citizens stronger and happier. But just think, that clerk at Ellis Island almost turned Charles Steinmetz away." Charles Steinmetz and his friend Oscar were two of the 23 million immigrants who came to the United States between the years of 1880 and 1920. The majority of these immigrants were from the European continent. Like Charles, these European immigrants sailed into New York Harbor and were registered into the United States at Ellis Island. Sometimes immigrants' names were recorded and changed, or even shortened to make them easier to say. And sometimes, as almost happened to Charles, immigrants were turned away if they were too sick or did not have the right papers. Can you imagine what your life would be like today if Charles Steinmetz had been sent back to Germany?